Nobody warns you that the most dangerous person in your life will be the one who always sounds reasonable. My name is Mara. I am 31 years old. And the night that changed everything did not happen with screaming or tears. It happened quietly, over dinner, in front of 12 people who said absolutely nothing. My mother looked across the table, set down her wine glass, and said 4 words. You were always difficult. Not shouted, not whispered, said the way you announce the weather. Casual, final, like a verdict that had already been decided long before the trial began. I did not cry. I did not defend myself. I picked up my napkin, folded it neatly beside my plate, and said, "Thank you for dinner." Then I left. What happened after I walked out of that house? That is the part nobody expected, including me. Before we go further, if you have ever been made to feel like the problem in a room that you did not break, stay with me. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because this story does not end the way you think it does. To understand that dinner, you need to understand the 15 years that came before it. My mother, Carol, ran our household the way a corporation runs a quarterly report. Everything measured, everything controlled, and anything that didn't fit the numbers was quietly written off. She never raised her voice. That was the thing people always said about her. Carol is so composed, so gracious. And she was. Publicly, what they did not see was how that composure functioned like a weapon inside the house. When I was 17 and won a regional art competition, she told the relatives it was a nice hobby. When I got accepted to a university 3 states away, she cried, not with pride, but with a kind of grief that made me feel guilty for succeeding somewhere she couldn't supervise. My sister, Petra, moved differently in that house. She understood the unspoken rules. She knew when to agree, when to redirect, when to make mom feel like the wisest person in the room. It was not dishonesty exactly, it was survival shaped into strategy. I never learned that language. I said what I thought. I pushed back when things were unfair. And every single time, I was the difficult one, not because I was wrong, but because I refused to pretend otherwise. Here is the thing about people who control through calm. They don't need to attack you directly. They simply shape the story around you until you become the villain in a narrative you never agreed to be part of. I did not realize how thoroughly that had been done to me until 3 days after that dinner. My phone buzzed at 11 p.m. It was my cousin Diane. Cautious message, careful words. I don't know if you're aware of what's being said. I wasn't. What I learned over the next hour was this. After I left that dinner, my mother did not sit in silence. She moved. She called my aunt. She called 2 family friends. She spoke to the pastor who ran a community grief group I had been volunteering with for 8 months. She did not accuse me of anything dramatic. She simply expressed concern. Concern that I had been under enormous stress. Concern that my behavior had become unpredictable. Concern, and this was the precise word Diane used, that I might not be stable enough for roles that required emotional responsibility. She said it like she was protecting people from me. Within 48 hours, I received a gentle email from the grief group coordinator. My volunteer position was being reassigned temporarily. No explanation beyond a reference to recent concerns. She hadn't confronted me. She hadn't argued with me. She had simply repositioned me, in the community, in the family, in every room I hadn't even been standing in. This is the part one want you to sit with, because what she did wasn't explosive. It wasn't obvious. It was architectural. She built a version of me that I had no access to and placed it everywhere I was about to walk. And my first instinct, like yours probably would be, was to defend myself. I didn't. I made a choice that felt completely wrong in the moment and turned out to be the only thing that mattered. I went quiet, not out of fear, not because I had nothing to say, but because I understood, for the first time clearly, that every response I gave would be filtered through a lens that had already decided what I was. Defending myself inside that system wasn't fighting back. It was feeding it. So I stopped attending, stopped explaining, stopped sending the messages I drafted at 2 a.m. and deleted by morning. I focused on my work. I showed up for the few people who had actually asked me, not for a version of me, but for me. And then something shifted. When I stopped reacting, the spotlight had nowhere to go. Questions that were once aimed at my behavior slowly turned toward the source of the original complaint. People began noticing the pattern, not just with me, but stretching back years. Other names, other quiet removals, other people who had been repositioned out of rooms without understanding why. The grief group reached out again, this time with questions, not decisions. The coordinator wanted to understand what had actually happened. There was no documentation, no evidence, nothing behind the concern except the calm, credible voice of a woman who had spent decades being trusted without being tested. 3 months later, my mother's influence inside that community had quietly collapsed. Not dramatically. There was no confrontation scene, no public unraveling. Invitations simply stopped. stopped. Her calls went to longer voicemails. The deference she had always received was replaced by polite, measured distance. She called me once during this period. She did not apologize. She told me I had embarrassed the family and that I would regret the bridges I was burning. I listened to the whole thing. Then I said, "I appreciate you calling," and I hung up. I did not cut my mother off in anger. I did it with complete clarity. Staying would have required me to keep performing a version of myself built entirely around her comfort, and I had spent 31 years already doing that. The cost was not worth what was being offered in return. The hardest lesson this taught me is one I want to leave with you. Some people do not need your reaction to control you. They only need your presence. Removing your presence is not surrender. It is not dramatic. It is sometimes the most honest thing you can do, for yourself and for the truth. You are not the difficult one for refusing to be silent. You never were. If this story reached something in you, drop a word in the comments. You don't have to explain. Just let someone know they're not alone. And if you haven't already, subscribe. There are more stories here worth staying for.